Here is hoping you find yourself someplace in this beautiful story, the walk to Emmaus. Now, on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we'd hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us what they had seen in a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it, just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were our hearts burning? Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Here ends this reading inspired by God. May God grant to us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
E is for evangelical. As the sermon title in the bulletin gives away, I was going to preach about what it means to be evangelical. It was one of those sermons that comes on its own and begins to write itself. Funny lines from the Broadway musical Book of Mormon were to be sung. Stories of my own doorbell-ringing days as a kid raised in a community that gathered in the church parking lot every Tuesday evening to divvy up various neighborhoods so we could invite them to church and talk to them about Jesus. I was going to tell those stories. But part of sermon preparation involves reading the newspaper, and this has been one of those weeks. On Tuesday, the state of Oklahoma attempted to execute death row inmate Clayton Lockett. The state was also supposed to execute a second man, Charles Warner. Neither men were executed, although Lockett did in fact die that night. Although there are some alternative theories, we are pretty sure what actually happened. An inadequate amount of drugs used in the execution was administered, and Lockett would not or could not die. The execution was called off, but Lockett did end up dying, apparently of a heart attack. As a result, the execution of Warner was postponed. On Wednesday morning, the story was splashed across too many newspapers to count, and people wondered yet again, what in the world is wrong with Oklahoma? At this point, I wonder if they really ask, what in the world isn't wrong with Oklahoma? I worked for a while at modifying the original sermon. I had an outline and a punchline. I just needed to figure out how capital punishment fit into the argument of why I believe that we are all evangelicals, especially progressive Christians. We do, in fact, have good news to share, and it isn't tied to purity or original sin or the pearly gates of heaven. Love God and love your neighbor. The trickle-up gospel is for everyone. This is the good news, and we must share it. Evangelism can't just be done by people who roam neighborhoods handing out tracts outlining the plan of salvation. Evangelism desperately needs to be reclaimed by those of us who don't have tracts to pass out, because we trust that salvation is not a 3-step admit, believe, commit plan. But that was the sermon I didn't write. Because even though I had an outline and a punchline, I kept getting distracted by the big, unwieldy, heavy weight of what a faithful response to capital punishment might be. You would think that our text this morning would be the perfect sermon, the perfect text for a sermon on capital punishment. Here we have 2 followers of Jesus on their way to Emmaus, talking, as the text says, about all the things that had happened, when a stranger joins them and asks what they are discussing. This guy can't be serious, can he? Jesus of Nazareth was crucified a week ago. Capital punishment. The state had executed Jesus. 2,000 years later, we are still talking about capital punishment. This is where it would be really nice if Jesus or the other 2 travelers would have had something like, oh, I don't know, God is anti-death penalty, or Jesus is anti-death penalty, or people of the way are anti-death penalty. This would have been the perfect spot for an unequivocal statement on capital punishment. The biblical authors really dropped the ball on this one. There is no unequivocal statement. A debate rages about the use of the death penalty, although ultimately we must conclude that it is about bloodlust and vengeance. I know that those words seem harsh. We would prefer to not think of it that way, but the death penalty does not work on many fronts. For starters, we have a history of convicting people of crimes they did not commit. The Innocence Project estimates that between 2.3% and 5% of all prisoners in the U.S. are innocent. For context, if just 1% of all prisoners are innocent, that would mean that more than 20,000 innocent people are in prison for crimes they did not commit. Studies show that of the approximate 3,000 U.S. prisoners waiting to be put to death, no less than 4% are actually innocent of the crimes they have been convicted. We know that the death penalty is not a deterrent. Study after study shows the possibility of being put to death does not decrease murder or heinous crime rates. And we know that the death penalty does not even the score. There is no such thing as a life for a life. We don't need a study to tell us that. But the truth is that this head knowledge about the death penalty just isn't emotionally satisfying. It's not. There are victims and perpetrators whose crimes make us feel like those perpetrators deserve to be victims of something. And all this while knowing that the death penalty doesn't do anything that it is supposed to do. It makes for a long week. For the past 4 days, I have wrestled with how to put that into a sermon. And it kept coming out as a conversation with God about this terrible, awful mess. The same conversation over and over that circled back on itself over and over, and I could not get away from it. So the sermon this morning is a prayer. Perhaps you have prayed it or parts of it. I am convinced that we must keep praying, because doing so will keep our hearts and our minds open and engaged, and that is the only way we can figure out how to love God and love our neighbors. So, keep your eyes open or close them, fold your hands or clench them. Just pray with me. Oh God, Stephanie Neiman has been dead for 15 years. She was shot and then buried alive. Her loss cannot be filled or replaced or lightened or lessened or anything that we hope that time will do for the heartache her parents feel. They should be worried about what Stephanie's next career move will take her, not attending hearings about the fate of her daughter's killer. 19, a high school graduate for all of 2 weeks, she was in the Perry High School marching band. And then just like that, she was murdered. We cannot bear to imagine the last minutes of her life. Being buried alive is the stuff of horror movies. But this is a real-life horror story. She must have been so scared, God. And that is the hardest part. No one should be scared when they die, except maybe the person who can bury someone else alive. And then, God, there is that little baby, Adriana. Little Adriana, not quite 1 year old, who was raped and murdered. Oh God, there are no words for this. Only rage and disbelief that something that awful happened. And then more rage. Everything inside us says that this is one of those cases where what comes around should go around. And if we can make it happen sooner rather than later for the man who did the raping and the killing, then let's do it. Her skull, jaw, and ribs were fractured. Her liver was lacerated. Her spleen and lungs were bruised. Let's see how he likes it, we say. Anything less, and it seems like we are condoning the crime, letting him off easy. She was a baby. A baby. Stephanie and Adriana, what are we supposed to do with this, God, except demand an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? There is no way to even the score, or make any of this right, or even make us feel better. The rage and the fear that come with news that teenagers and babies have been murdered does not simply go away when we punish the offenders with death. We want it to. We want killing them to be like pushing the easy button for our emotions. Why doesn't it work like that, God? Why? Why? That's what we're left with, isn't it? Why? Why did any of this happen in the first place? Did Lockett and Warner not get hugged enough as kids? Were they abused and neglected growing up? We would really like something to blame this on. But even if we can say that their crimes can be traced back to poverty or physical and emotional abuse or hunger or economics or probably all of those things combined, it doesn't excuse anything. Don't kill people. And then, as if we could undo these 2 specific murders, we think to ourselves, don't kill people, especially if they are teenagers or babies. This is Humanity 101. That really shouldn't be too hard a rule to keep, right, God? Except that we have decided to kill Lockett and Warner. And now we're back to where we started. You already know this, God, but we killed Lockett on Tuesday. We were trying to do it on purpose, but ended up killing him by accident. We didn't get it right, and it isn't the first time we've tortured someone to death. We have blood on our hands. Everything about the business of killing people who kill people is awful. So help us, God. Help us cling to life. We follow the teachings of a man who taught and preached and lived love. Not the easy, mile wide and an inch deep kind, but the kind of love that does hard things, like refuse vengeance. The kind of love that stands beside weeping parents and grieves with them. Love that finds the humanity in murderers and grieves for them. Love that does not return evil for evil. 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 May it be so. Amen.